In the mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through the wind and shadows hold secrets, Lieutenant Sarah Chen thought she knew what fear looked like. She had spent 3 years behind a desk, analyzing enemy patterns, studying satellite images, and writing reports that others would use in the field. Her war was fought with computers and coffee, not bullets and blood. But on a scorching Tuesday morning, in July 2012, when her convoy took that wrong turn down a dusty mountain road, Sarah discovered that the enemy had been watching her just as carefully as she had been watching them. The intelligence officer who had spent countless hours studying sniper tactics through reports and data was about to face the deadliest marksman in the region. What she didn't know was that her analytical mind and photographic memory would become the very weapons that would turn her from hunted prey into the hunter. This is the true story of how a desk officer became a legend, how fear transformed into fury, and how one woman's quest for survival changed her into something the enemy never saw coming. In the unforgiving terrain where mountains touched the sky and every rock could hide death, Sarah Chen was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the gun, it's the mind that knows how to use it. Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the bulletproof window of the armored vehicle, watching the Afghan landscape roll past in waves of brown and gold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mountains, creating a pattern of light and dark that reminded her of the satellite images she studied every day at Bagram Airfield. 3 years of intelligence work had taught her to see the world in grids and coordinates, in patterns and probabilities. But today, something felt different. The convoy of 4 vehicles moved steadily through the winding mountain road, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the air like smoke signals. Sarah adjusted her headset and listened to the chatter between the drivers. They were taking a new route back to base, one that would cut their travel time by 40 minutes. In a war zone where every minute on the road increased the risk of ambush, 40 minutes was a lifetime. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the convoy leader, had made the decision at the last checkpoint. Sarah knew Rodriguez from the base, a veteran with 2 tours under his belt and a reputation for getting his people home safely. He had studied the maps, consulted with local intelligence, and determined that Highway 7 was clear. Sarah trusted his judgment, but her analytical mind couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. She opened her laptop and pulled up the regional threat assessment she had completed just 2 days earlier. The screen showed a patchwork of red, yellow, and green zones, indicating various levels of enemy activity. Their current route cut through what she'd classified as a yellow zone, moderate risk, but not enough to warrant avoiding the area entirely. Still, something nagged at her. The vehicle lurched as they hit a pothole, and Sarah gripped her laptop to keep it from sliding off her lap. Beside her, Corporal James Tank Williams chuckled and shook his head. Tank was her assigned bodyguard for this mission, a mountain of a man from Texas who had earned his nickname by walking through enemy fire like it was a light rain. "You always this nervous on road trips, Lieutenant?" Tank asked, his drawl thick with amusement. Sarah managed to smile. "Just doing my job, Corporal. Threat assessment is a continuous process." "Well, assess this," Tank said, pulling out his phone to show her a picture of his newborn daughter. 3 weeks old. My wife says she's got my stubborn streak, but her mama's brains. Thank God for that. Sarah studied the photo, seeing the pride in Tank's eyes. This was his 3rd deployment, and she knew he was counting down the days until he could go home for good. They all were. The war in Afghanistan had been going on for over a decade, and everyone was tired. Tired of the heat, tired of the constant vigilance, tired of sleeping with one eye open. The radio crackled to life, breaking her thoughts. Eagle 1 to all units, we're approaching checkpoint Charlie. Stay alert. Sarah looked out the window and saw the landscape changing. The road was narrowing, with rocky outcroppings on both sides that created natural hiding spots. Her training kicked in automatically, and she began cataloguing potential sniper positions. There was a ridgeline about 800 meters to the north that offered excellent sight lines to the road. A cluster of boulders to the south could conceal a spotter. The abandoned village they had passed 5 minutes ago could house a support team. She shook her head, trying to silence the analytical voice in her mind. This was Rodriguez's show, and he knew what he was doing. Her job was to gather intelligence, not to second-guess every tactical decision. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The first shot came without warning. Sarah was looking down at her laptop when the world exploded around her. The sharp crack of a high-powered rifle echoed off the mountain walls, followed immediately by the distinctive ping of a bullet hitting armored glass. The vehicle lurched to the left as the driver instinctively swerved, tires squealing against the gravel road. "Contact! Contact!" Rodriguez's voice exploded through the radio. "Sniper fire from the North Ridge. All units, evasive maneuvers. Sarah's laptop flew across the cabin as Tank threw himself on top of her, his massive frame covering her completely. The vehicle accelerated, engine roaring as they tried to outrun the invisible threat. Through Tank's arm, Sarah could see muzzle flashes winking from the rocky ridgeline like deadly stars. Another shot rang out, this one striking the vehicle behind them. Sarah could hear the driver cursing over the radio as he fought to maintain control. The convoy was trapped in a kill zone, exactly the kind of scenario she had studied in hundreds of intelligence reports. But experiencing it firsthand was nothing like reading about it in an air-conditioned office. How many shooters? Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. Sarah's mind automatically began processing the sounds and patterns. 3 distinct rifle reports, different acoustic signatures, firing from separate positions along the ridge. Her years of studying enemy tactics kicked in, and she found herself cataloging details even as bullets whined overhead. "Lieutenant," Tank shouted over the noise. "You okay?" Before Sarah could answer, their driver screamed over the intercom. "Lost the engine, we're going down." The armored vehicle rolled to a stop in the middle of the narrow road, steam hissing from under the hood. Behind them, the other vehicles had taken cover behind a rock formation, but they were still exposed to fire from above. Sarah realized with crystal clarity that they were in the worst possible position, stationary targets in an open killing field. Tank was already moving, grabbing his rifle and checking his gear. "Ma'am, we need to get you out of here. Can you move?" Sarah nodded, her training overriding her fear. She had been through combat scenarios at Fort Gordon, though nothing had prepared her for the real thing. As Tank opened the armored door, she could smell gunpowder and hear the sharp whistle of bullets passing nearby. "There's a drainage ditch about 30 meters to our right," Tank said, studying the terrain. "If we can make it there, we'll have some cover while we wait for backup." Sarah looked where he was pointing and saw a shallow depression that ran parallel to the road. It wasn't much, but it was better than staying in the disabled vehicle. She grabbed her laptop bag and followed Tank as he opened the door. The moment they stepped outside, the world became a symphony of violence. Bullets cracked overhead, sending up puffs of dust and fragments of shattered rock. Tank moved with surprising grace for such a large man, his rifle ready as he scanned for threats. Sarah stayed low behind him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the gunfire. They made it halfway to the ditch when the ground exploded right beside Sarah's feet. The sniper had adjusted his aim, and the next shot would not miss. Time seemed to slow down as she realized she was about to die on this dusty mountain road, thousands of miles from home. But Tank was already moving, tackling her sideways into the ditch, just as another bullet whined through the space where her head had been. They tumbled down the slope in a tangle of arms and legs, finally coming to rest against the rocky bottom of the drainage channel. "Stay down," Tank ordered, but Sarah was already studying the terrain around them. Her analytical mind was working overtime, processing the tactical situation with the same systematic approach she used for intelligence analysis. 3 snipers positioned along the north ridge at approximately 800-meter intervals. Based on the sound signatures, they were using different weapons, probably a mix of Russian Dragunov rifles and American M24s captured from previous engagements. The firing pattern suggested they were communicating with each other, coordinating their shots to keep the convoy pinned down. "Tank," she said, surprising herself with how calm her voice sounded. "The lead sniper is using the large boulder cluster at grid reference 341892. He's got the best angle on our position, but he's also the most exposed if someone could get around behind him." Tank stared at her. "How the hell do you know that?" "I've been studying this area for 3 years, Sarah replied, pulling out her laptop. Despite the chaos around them, the screen still showed the detailed topographical map she had been reviewing. "Look here, there's a goat path that runs up the backside of that ridge. It's not marked on most maps, but I spotted it in the satellite imagery last month." She pointed to a thin line that snaked up the mountain, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Tank studied the screen, then looked back at the ridge where muzzle flashes continued to wink in the sunlight. "You want to go up there?" he asked incredulously. "I want to get out of here alive," Sarah replied. "And right now the only way to do that is to eliminate the threat. They've got us pinned down, and backup is at least 20 minutes away. That's too long." Tank was quiet for a moment, considering her words. In the distance, they could hear Rodriguez coordinating with the other vehicles, trying to establish a defensive perimeter. But everyone knew they were in a bad position. The snipers held the high ground and could pick them off at will. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're an intelligence officer. This isn't your job." Sarah looked at him, feeling something cold and hard settle in her chest. For 3 years, she had watched other people fight this war while she sat behind a desk, analyzing their reports and mapping their battles. She had memorized the faces of fallen soldiers, studied the tactics that had killed them, and written recommendations that might save future lives. But she had never pulled a trigger in anger, never felt the weight of responsibility that came with taking a life. Today, that was going to change. "Corporal Williams," she said, using his formal rank for the first time since they had met. "I know these mountains better than anyone in this convoy. I know where those snipers are positioned, how they're communicating, and what their next move will be. Right now, that knowledge is the only thing keeping us alive." She closed the laptop and slung the bag over her shoulder. "Besides, my job is gathering intelligence. Sometimes that means going to where the intelligence is." Tank studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. What do you need me to do?" Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the big Texan. He could have refused, could have insisted on waiting for backup, or trying a different approach. Instead, he was trusting her judgment, betting his life on her analysis. "Cover me while I work my way to that goat path," she said. "Once I'm in position, I'll signal you. Give me 15 minutes to get behind them. Then create a distraction down here. Draw their fire while I move in close." "And then what?" Sarah checked the pistol on her hip, making sure it was loaded and ready. She had qualified as an expert marksman in training, but shooting paper targets was very different from shooting people. Still, she had studied enemy sniper techniques extensively. She knew their blind spots, their weaknesses, their patterns. "Then I do what intelligence officers do," she said. "I eliminate the threat." As bullets continued to crack overhead, and her fellow soldiers fought for their lives, Sarah Chen prepared to leave the safety of the ditch and climb toward the enemy positions. She was no longer just an intelligence officer analyzing the war from a distance. She was about to become part of it, and the men who had been hunting her convoy were about to discover that sometimes the prey fights back. The mountains of Afghanistan were about to witness the birth of something new, a predator who thought like a strategist and struck like a snake. Sarah Chen was about to discover what she was truly capable of when everything she cared about was on the line. Behind her, Tank chambered around and settled into position to provide covering fire. Above them, the enemy snipers continued their deadly work, unaware that death was climbing the mountain toward them, guided by 3 years of intelligence training and a mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos. The hunt was about to begin. The goat path was barely visible, just a series of worn spots in the rock face where countless animals had picked their way up the mountain over the years. Sarah pressed herself against the cold stone, feeling the rough texture through her uniform as she slowly worked her way upward. Each step had to be calculated, each movement deliberate. One loose rock, one careless footfall, and the snipers above would know she was coming. Below her, the firefight continued. She could hear Tank's M4 rifle chattering in controlled bursts, laying down covering fire to keep the enemy's attention focused on the road. Rodriguez was coordinating with the other vehicles, their voices crackling through her earpiece as they tried to establish better defensive positions. But Sarah knew they were running out of time. The snipers had them pinned down, and sooner or later, someone would make a mistake. She paused on a narrow ledge to catch her breath and check her position. According to her calculations, she was about halfway up the mountain, moving parallel to the enemy positions, but staying well below the ridgeline. The satellite images she had memorized showed a series of natural terraces that would give her cover as she approached the sniper positions from behind. Her hands were already torn and bleeding from the sharp rocks, but she ignored the pain. This was nothing compared to what her fellow soldiers were enduring down below. Through her scope, she had watched Tank take a bullet through the shoulder, though he was still fighting. The medic in the third vehicle was treating 2 wounded soldiers, working frantically to keep them stable. Sarah pulled out her phone and activated the tactical mapping app she had developed during her deployment. The GPS coordinates showed her exact position relative to the enemy snipers. According to her analysis, the nearest shooter was about 200 meters above her, positioned behind a cluster of boulders that provided excellent concealment and fields of fire. She resumed climbing, her movements becoming more fluid as she found her rhythm. The intelligence training that had seemed so theoretical back at Fort Gordon was now keeping her alive. Every lesson about enemy tactics, every briefing about Afghan terrain, every hour spent studying topographical maps was paying dividends as she navigated the treacherous mountain face. As she climbed higher, Sarah began to hear voices carried on the wind. The snipers were talking to each other in Pashto, their words echoing off the rock walls. She had studied the language during her deployment, and while she wasn't fluent, she could understand enough to follow their conversation. They were coordinating their next phase of attack. The lead sniper was planning to move to a new position that would give him a better angle on the disabled vehicle where Tank was sheltering. Another was calling for their spotter team to advance down the mountain and finish off any survivors. Sarah realized with growing alarm that this wasn't just an opportunistic ambush. It was a carefully planned operation designed to eliminate her entire convoy. She reached into her pack and pulled out the encrypted radio she used for intelligence communications. Switching to the command frequency, she whispered into the microphone. "Overwatch. This is Eagle 7. I have eyes on enemy positions and am monitoring their communications. They're planning to advance on our location in approximately 10 minutes. Recommend immediate air support." The response came back immediately. "Eagle 7, this is Overwatch. Air support is 20 minutes out. Can your position hold?" Sarah looked down at the road below, where she could see muzzle flashes from Tank's position and the other vehicles. They were outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in a kill zone with limited ammunition and wounded soldiers. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. Negative, Overwatch. We need immediate intervention or we're going to lose people. There was a pause. Then the voice came back with a tone of resignation. Roger that, Eagle 7. You're authorized to take whatever action necessary to preserve Coalition lives. Good hunting. Sarah switched off the radio and continued climbing. The phrase, "whatever action necessary," echoed in her mind as she worked her way toward the enemy positions. She was no longer just gathering intelligence, she had become the intervention. The first sniper position was located exactly where her analysis had predicted. A shallow depression between two large boulders provided perfect concealment while offering clear lines of sight to the road below. Sarah could see the barrel of a rifle protruding from the shadows, and occasionally caught glimpses of movement as the shooter adjusted his position. She studied the approach carefully. The sniper was focused on the targets below, his attention completely absorbed by the tactical situation on the road. His weapon appeared to be a Russian Dragunov, probably captured from previous battles, or supplied through the complex web of arms dealers that fed the insurgency. From her position about 50 meters away, she could make out details of his equipment and position. Sarah drew her sidearm, a standard issue M9 Beretta that she had qualified with countless times, but never fired in combat. The weight felt different now, heavier with purpose and consequence. Her hands were steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, years of training taking over as she prepared for what came next. She moved carefully across the rocky terrain, using every piece of natural cover available. Each step was planned and executed with the methodical precision that had made her one of the best intelligence analysts in the theater. But now she was applying that same systematic approach to stalking an enemy soldier who was trying to kill her friends. At 30 meters, she could hear the sniper's breathing and see the rise and fall of his shoulders as he lined up his next shot. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with the lean build of someone who had spent his life in these mountains. Sarah found herself wondering about his story, why he was fighting, what had brought him to this moment. Then she remembered Tank's wounded shoulder and pushed the thoughts aside. At 20 meters, she could see the brass casing scattered around his position and smell the acrid scent of gunpowder. The sniper was completely focused on his work, tracking targets through his scope with professional competence. Sarah realized she was looking at a skilled opponent, someone who had probably killed many coalition soldiers from positions just like this one. At 10 meters, she raised her pistol and took careful aim. Her training had taught her to go for center mass, the largest target area with the highest probability of stopping an enemy quickly. But her intelligence background had also taught her the value of captured prisoners and the intelligence they could provide. For a moment she hesitated. The decision was made for her when the sniper suddenly shifted position, turning slightly in her direction, as if he had sensed something wrong. Their eyes met across the rocky terrain, and Sarah saw surprise and recognition flash across his face. He was already reaching for a pistol of his own when she pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed off the mountain walls, much louder than she had expected. The sniper slumped forward over his rifle, his body going limp as the bullet found its mark. Sarah felt a strange disconnection from what had just happened, as if she were watching someone else's actions from a distance. She moved quickly to secure the position, taking the sniper's rifle and checking for any intelligence materials. His pockets yielded a notebook filled with hand-drawn maps and tactical observations, along with a radio that was crackling with urgent voices. The other snipers had heard the shot and were trying to contact their fallen comrade. Sarah studied the notebook quickly, her intelligence training allowing her to rapidly assess the tactical significance of what she had found. The maps showed not just this ambush site, but several others along the major supply routes. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger campaign to disrupt coalition logistics in the region. She grabbed the radio and listened to the chatter, translating the urgent Pashto conversations in her head. The second sniper was reporting that he had lost contact with Position 1 and was requesting instructions. A third voice, probably the overall commander, was ordering both remaining shooters to maintain their positions and continue the engagement. Sarah realized she had an opportunity. The enemy didn't know their comrade was dead. They thought he was just having radio problems. If she could use that confusion to her advantage, she might be able to eliminate the other positions before they realized what was happening. She picked up the Dragunov rifle, surprised by its weight and the smooth action of the bolt. During her intelligence training, she had familiarized herself with various enemy weapons systems, but handling one in combat was a completely different experience. The scope was zeroed for longer ranges than her pistol, and from this elevated position, she had clear lines of sight to the other sniper positions. Through the scope, she could see the second shooter about 300 meters away. He was positioned behind a low stone wall, his rifle trained on Tank's position below. As Sarah watched, she saw him fire. The muzzle flashed bright against the shadows. Down on the road, she heard Tank curse over the radio as the bullet struck near his position. Sarah adjusted the scope settings based on her knowledge of the weapon system and the range to target. Her intelligence training had included extensive ballistics calculations, and she found herself automatically compensating for wind speed, elevation, and atmospheric conditions. The mathematical precision that had made her an excellent analyst was now being applied to the art of long-range shooting. She lined up the crosshairs on the second sniper's center mass and controlled her breathing the way she had been taught. The shot had to be perfect. If she missed, she would give away her position and lose the advantage of surprise. Everything depended on the next few seconds. The rifle bucked against her shoulder as she fired, the powerful cartridge sending the bullet across the mountain terrain at over 2,800 feet per second. Through the scope, she saw the second sniper jerk backward and disappear from view. The radio in her hand immediately exploded with excited chatter as the remaining enemy fighters tried to figure out what was happening. 2 down, 1 to go. But the third sniper had figured out that something was wrong. Sarah could hear him moving, abandoning his position and trying to flank around to where the shots had come from. She grabbed the enemy radio and the captured maps, then began moving toward the final position, using the terrain to mask her approach. This was the most dangerous part of her improvised mission. The remaining sniper was alerted and mobile, probably trying to work his way around behind her. Sarah had the advantage of knowing the terrain from her satellite analysis, but he had the advantage of years of experience fighting in these mountains. She moved carefully from cover to cover, pausing frequently to listen for sounds of movement. The firefight below had intensified as Tank and the other soldiers tried to take advantage of the reduced sniper fire. She could hear Rodriguez coordinating an advance, trying to move his people to better positions while they had the opportunity. The third sniper's position had been the most cleverly chosen of the three. He had established himself in a natural cave that provided excellent protection while still offering good fields of fire. Sarah approached from above, using a series of rock formations to conceal her movement. The captured radio continued to crackle with urgent communications as other enemy elements tried to figure out what was happening to their sniper team.
As she got closer, Sarah could smell cigarette smoke and hear the distinctive sound of someone loading ammunition into a magazine.
The final enemy fighter was preparing for a sustained engagement, probably planning to keep the convoy pinned down until reinforcements could arrive. Sarah realized she was running out of time. If she didn't eliminate this threat quickly, more enemy fighters would arrive and her small advantage would be lost. She positioned herself on a ledge about 20 meters above the cave entrance, studying the tactical situation. The sniper was hidden inside the cave, but she could see the barrel of his rifle protruding from the shadows. Her captured Dragunov would be unwieldy at this close range, but her pistol might not have enough penetration to be effective against a target in cover. Then she remembered something from her intelligence briefings about enemy tactics in Afghanistan. Many of the cave positions used by insurgent fighters had been originally excavated by the Soviets during their occupation in the 1980s. The caves often had multiple entrances and interconnecting passages that allowed fighters to move between positions without being exposed. Sarah studied the terrain around the cave mouth, looking for signs of secondary entrances. Her satellite imagery training had taught her to look for subtle indicators: changes in vegetation, disturbed soil, unnatural drainage patterns. After several minutes of careful observation, she spotted what she was looking for. About 30 meters to the left of the main cave entrance, there was a small depression in the rock face that looked like natural erosion but showed signs of human modification. It was probably a back entrance or ventilation shaft that connected to the main cave system. If she could get to it without being detected, she might be able to approach the sniper from an unexpected direction. The movement required crossing exposed ground, but Sarah had studied the sniper's field of fire from the main cave entrance. There was a narrow corridor between two rock formations that would keep her outside his line of sight if she moved quickly and stayed low. She holstered the captured rifle and drew her pistol again, knowing that the final confrontation would be at close quarters. The intelligence officer who had started this day analyzing satellite images was about to end it in hand-to-hand combat with an enemy sniper in an underground cave system. As she prepared to make her move, Sarah thought about Tank and the other soldiers depending on her success. She thought about the wounded men who needed medical evacuation and the convoy that was still trapped in the kill zone. Most of all, she thought about the notebook full of enemy plans she had captured. Intelligence that could save countless lives if she could get it back to base. The time for analysis was over. Now it was time to act. The secondary entrance to the cave was barely large enough for Sarah to squeeze through. She had to remove her pack and push it ahead of her as she crawled through the narrow opening, feeling the rough stones scrape against her uniform. The darkness was complete once she moved away from the entrance, and she had to rely on touch and sound to navigate the underground passage. The cave system was more extensive than she had expected. What had looked like a simple sniper hide from the outside was actually part of a complex network of tunnels and chambers that had probably been used by fighters for decades. Sarah could smell the lingering odor of gunpowder, unwashed bodies, and something else. The distinctive scent of explosives. She paused in the darkness, letting her eyes adjust while she listened for sounds of movement. Somewhere ahead of her, she could hear the enemy sniper moving around, probably trying to establish new fields of fire as he realized his position was being threatened. The radio chatter she had been monitoring suggested that he was the commander of this particular cell, which explained why he hadn't abandoned his position like a less experienced fighter might have. Sarah activated the small tactical flashlight on her pistol, keeping the beam pointed downward to minimize its visibility. The narrow corridor she was following showed signs of recent use: scuff marks on the floor, cigarette butts, empty food containers. This wasn't just a fighting position. It was a semi-permanent base that had been occupied for weeks or months. As she moved deeper into the cave system, Sarah began to understand the full scope of what she had stumbled into. This wasn't just a sniper team conducting an opportunistic ambush. The map she had captured from the first shooter, combined with the evidence of long-term occupation in these caves, suggested something much more significant. She was looking at a major staging area for insurgent operations in the region. The tunnel branched ahead of her, splitting into two passages that led deeper into the mountain. Sarah had to make a choice without knowing which route would lead her to the enemy sniper. She listened carefully, trying to detect any sounds that might guide her decision. From the right-hand passage, she could hear the faint echo of radio transmissions. That was where her target was hiding. She moved carefully down the right tunnel, her pistol ready and her finger on the trigger. The passage opened into a larger chamber that had been carved out of the natural rock formation. Sarah could see evidence of extensive occupation, sleeping areas, weapons storage, communications equipment, and supplies for a prolonged operation. But what caught her attention immediately was the cache of weapons and ammunition stored along one wall. There were enough rifles, explosives, and military equipment to supply a company-sized unit. Sarah realized she wasn't just dealing with the sniper team. She had discovered a major weapons cache that was probably supplying insurgent operations throughout the province. The enemy sniper was positioned at the far end of the chamber, behind a barricade of sandbags and ammunition boxes that gave him cover, while allowing him to observe the main cave entrance. He had his back to Sarah's position, focused on the tunnels that led to the outside. The radio beside him crackled with urgent messages from other insurgent units, but he seemed to be ignoring them as he concentrated on the immediate tactical situation. Sarah studied the layout of the chamber, looking for the best approach. The floor was littered with loose stones and debris that would make silent movement difficult. There were several routes she could take, but all of them would require crossing open ground where she might be exposed if the enemy fighter turned around. She was considering her options when the sniper suddenly spoke into his radio, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Sarah's limited understanding of Pashto allowed her to catch the general meaning of his transmission. He was reporting that his two companions had been killed and requesting immediate reinforcements. He also mentioned that he had captured intelligence materials that needed to be evacuated. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Intelligence materials, that could only mean the notebook she had taken from the first sniper position. Somehow, he knew about the captured documents, which meant he had probably been observing her movements through the cave system. She might be walking into a trap. Before she could reconsider her approach, the enemy fighter suddenly spun around, his rifle already trained on her position. Sarah dove sideways behind a pile of wooden crates just as his first shot echoed through the chamber. The bullet struck the stone wall where she had been standing, sending fragments of rock flying through the air. "American intelligence officer," the sniper called out in accented English. "I know who you are. I know what you have taken." Isa was surprised to hear him speaking English, but she didn't respond. Instead, she used the sound of his voice to pinpoint his exact position while she looked for a better firing angle. The wooden crates provided some protection, but they wouldn't stop rifle bullets for long. "You have caused much trouble today," the voice continued. "My brothers are dead because of you, but their sacrifice will not be wasted." Another shot rang out, this one splintering the wooden crate near Sarah's head. The sniper was probing her position, trying to flush her out into the open. Sarah realized he was probably moving between shots, using the sound of his own gunfire to mask his movement. She waited for the next muzzle flash, then immediately moved to a new position behind a different stack of supplies. Her movement drew another shot, but this time she was able to see exactly where it came from. The enemy fighter was positioned behind an overturned table about 20 meters away, using it as a shooting rest. Sarah had studied close-quarters combat techniques during her training, but she had never expected to use them in an underground cave system against an experienced enemy sniper. The confined space actually worked in her favor, limiting the range at which the engagement would take place and reducing the advantage of his more powerful weapon. She waited for him to fire again, then immediately returned fire with her pistol. The 9mm round struck the wooden table, sending splinters flying but not penetrating completely. However, the impact caused the sniper to duck down, giving Sarah the opportunity to advance to a closer position. "You Americans think you understand this war," the voice called out from behind the table. "You come here with your technology and your satellites, but you do not understand the mountains. You do not understand the people." Sarah moved again while he was talking, getting within 10 meters of his position. At this range, her pistol would be much more effective, and she would have a better angle to get around his improvised barricade. "I have been fighting in these mountains for 15 years, the sniper continued. "First against the Russians, then against the Northern Alliance, now against you Americans. The mountains do not change. The war does not change." "Maybe not," Sarah replied, speaking for the first time since entering the cave. "But today, it ends for you." She had positioned herself where she could see around the edge of his barricade. The enemy fighter was reloading his rifle, his attention focused on inserting a fresh magazine. Sarah took careful aim with her pistol and fired 3 rapid shots. The first bullet struck the sniper in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second caught him in the chest, driving him backward against the cave wall. The third shot was unnecessary, but Sarah's training had taught her to keep firing until the threat was eliminated. The cave fell silent except for the echo of gunshots fading away into the darkness. Sarah kept her pistol trained on the enemy fighter's position for several seconds, making sure he was no longer a threat. Only when she was certain he was down did she approach to secure the area. The enemy sniper was still alive, but barely. He looked up at Sarah with eyes that showed pain but no fear. "You fight well. For intelligence officer," he gasped. Sarah knelt beside him, applying pressure to his chest wound in an attempt to stop the bleeding. Her training had taught her to treat enemy wounded the same as friendly casualties, both for humanitarian reasons and because prisoners often provided valuable intelligence.
"Medical help is coming," she told him, though they both knew it wasn't true.
They were deep in hostile territory, and evacuation would be nearly impossible, even if there had been time. The wounded fighter shook his head slightly. "No help for me," he whispered. "But I tell you, this is only beginning. More will come, many more." He reached into his vest with a trembling hand and pulled out a small device that Sarah immediately recognized as a radio detonator. Her blood turned to ice as she realized what he was planning. "The weapons," he gasped, gesturing weakly toward the cache of explosives along the wall. "All wired. Dead man switch." Sarah looked around the chamber and saw the thin wires she had missed before, leading from the weapons cache to various points around the room. If the detonator was activated, the entire mountain would come down, burying both of them, along with all the evidence she had discovered. But something in the wounded fighter's eyes made her pause. There was resignation there, but also something else. Perhaps respect, or even regret. He held the detonator in his hand, his thumb hovering over the trigger, but he wasn't pressing it. "Why?" Sarah asked. The enemy sniper was quiet for a long moment, his breathing becoming more labored. You showed honor, he finally said. You came alone. You fought with courage. You tend my wounds. He closed his eyes briefly. War makes enemies of honorable people. Sarah realized she was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment of humanity in the midst of brutal conflict. This man had spent years fighting American forces, had probably killed dozens of coalition soldiers, but in these final moments he was choosing to act with honor. The detonator, she said quietly. He nodded weakly and let the device fall from his hand. Information you need is in radio. His voice was getting weaker. Tell your commanders this was just advanced team. Main force still coming. Sarah picked up the radio and checked the frequency settings. The device was tuned to multiple channels, suggesting a complex communication network that connected various insurgent cells throughout the region. The intelligence value of this equipment alone could be enormous. What's your name? She asked the dying fighter. Hassan Mohammed al-Pakistani, he whispered. Commander. He looked at her with eyes that were growing dim. What is your name? Sarah Chen. Lieutenant, U.S. Army Intelligence. Hassan nodded slightly. Good name. Good soldier. His breathing became more shallow. Tell your people, we fight for our mountains just as you fight for your country. Not so different. Sarah stayed with him until he died, holding pressure on his wounds even though she knew it was futile. When his breathing finally stopped, she closed his eyes and said a brief prayer, both for his soul and for the hope that someday the cycle of violence might end. She gathered up all the intelligence materials she could carry, radios, maps, documents, and communications equipment. The weapons cache was too extensive to destroy safely, but she could at least mark its location for future operations. The intelligence she had gathered would help the coalition forces understand the scope and organization of insurgent operations in the region. As she prepared to leave the cave system, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed inside her. She was no longer the same intelligence officer who had started this day analyzing satellite images from the safety of an air-conditioned office. The young woman who had been afraid to leave the protection of an armored vehicle was gone, replaced by someone harder and more confident. She had looked into the eyes of her enemies and discovered they were human beings with their own motivations and beliefs. She had taken lives in combat and found that she could live with the consequences. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that when everything was on the line, she could rise to meet the challenge. But as she made her way back through the dark tunnels toward the secondary entrance, Sarah also understood that this was just the beginning. Hassan's final words echoed in her mind. This had been just an advance team. The main force was still coming, and next time, they would be expecting her. The mountains of Afghanistan had claimed another piece of her innocence today, but they had also forged her into something new. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was no longer just an intelligence analyst. She was becoming a weapon, sharpened by necessity and tempered by combat, and the enemy was about to discover just how dangerous that weapon could be. 3 weeks after the mountain ambush, Sarah Chen sat in the intelligence briefing room at Bagram Airfield, surrounded by maps, photographs, and intercepted communications. The wounds on her hands had healed, but the memories of that day remained vivid. She could still smell the gunpowder in the cave, still hear Hassan's final words about the main force that was coming. The intelligence materials she had recovered from the cave had proven to be a treasure trove of information. The enemy radio alone had provided access to insurgent communication networks across 3 provinces, allowing coalition forces to monitor enemy movements and intercept planned attacks. The maps and documents had revealed a sophisticated network of weapons caches, safe houses, and staging areas that the insurgents had been developing for months. But it was the larger picture that emerged from the analysis that truly worried Sarah. Hassan had been telling the truth. The sniper team that had ambushed her convoy was just the advance element of a much larger operation. According to the captured documents, insurgent forces were planning a coordinated series of attacks designed to disrupt coalition supply lines and isolate forward operating bases throughout the region. Colonel Martinez, the intelligence chief for the regional command, had been studying the analysis for the past hour. Finally, he looked up from the documents and fixed Sarah with a steady gaze. Lieutenant Chen, this is exceptional work. Your actions during the ambush and the intelligence you recovered have potentially saved hundreds of lives. And, he paused, choosing his words carefully. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? Sarah looked at him questioningly.
Sir.
The enemy knows who you are now, Martinez explained. Word travels fast in these mountains, and what you did to that sniper team has made you a target. They're calling you the Ghost, the American intelligence officer who appears from nowhere and vanishes like smoke. He pulled out a photograph that had been intercepted from enemy communications. It showed Sarah climbing the goat path during the ambush, captured by a spotter who had been observing the battle from a distance. Her face was clearly visible, and someone had written notes in Pashto around the margins of the image. They've put a bounty on your head, Martinez continued. $20,000 American for your capture, dead or alive. That's more money than most of these fighters see in 5 years. Sarah studied the photograph, feeling a strange mix of pride and concern. She had always been careful to maintain her anonymity during intelligence operations, but combat had a way of stripping away such luxuries. Now she was a known quantity, a specific target rather than just another American soldier. What are you recommending, sir? Martinez leaned back in his chair. Normally, I'd recommend transferring you to a safer posting, maybe back to the States for analysis work. But these documents you recovered indicate that the main attack is coming within the next few weeks. We need someone who understands the enemy's tactics and organization to help coordinate our response.
He stood up and walked to the large map on the wall, pointing to several locations marked with red pins.
Intelligence suggests they're planning to hit these 5 locations simultaneously. 2 supply convoys, a forward operating base, a medical facility, and a key bridge that controls access to the northern valleys. It's a coordinated operation that could cripple our logistics in this entire region. Sarah joined him at the map, studying the target locations. Her analytical mind immediately began processing the tactical significance of each site. The medical facility treated wounded soldiers from across the region, while the bridge controlled the only reliable supply route to 3 forward operating bases. If the enemy could take out even half of these targets, they could effectively cut off coalition forces in the northern sector. How confident are we in this intelligence? She asked. Very confident. The radio intercepts corroborate the documents you recovered, and we've detected increased enemy movement in all the relevant areas.
Martinez turned to face her. But here's the problem. We don't know exactly when or how they're planning to strike.
The communications are deliberately vague, probably because they know we're monitoring their frequencies now. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. They're using operational security measures to prevent us from getting specific details about timing and methods. Which brings me to my proposal. Martinez returned to his desk and pulled out a classified folder. We want to insert you into the field as part of a special operations team. Your knowledge of enemy tactics and your proven ability to operate behind enemy lines would be invaluable for gathering the intelligence we need to stop these attacks. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The proposal was both exciting and terrifying. She had proven herself in combat once, but that had been a desperate situation where she had acted on instinct and adrenaline. This would be a deliberate operation, carefully planned and executed with full knowledge of the risks involved. What kind of mission are you talking about, sir? Martinez opened the folder and spread out several aerial photographs. We've identified what we believe is the enemy's main staging area for the operation, a valley complex about 40 kilometers north of here. It's heavily defended and too dangerous for conventional forces to approach. But a small team might be able to get close enough to gather actionable intelligence. The photograph showed a rugged mountain valley with several compounds scattered along a river. Sarah could see defensive positions, vehicle parks, and what looked like training areas. It was clearly a significant enemy stronghold, the kind of place that would require weeks of planning to assault with conventional forces. The mission would be reconnaissance only, Martinez emphasized. Get in, observe their preparations, identify the timing and methods for the planned attacks, then get out. No direct action unless absolutely necessary for mission success or force protection. Sarah studied the photographs more closely, her intelligence training automatically cataloging the various features and defensive positions. The valley was well chosen from a tactical standpoint. Multiple escape routes, natural defensive barriers, and excellent concealment from aerial surveillance. Getting close enough to gather meaningful intelligence would require exceptional skill and no small amount of luck. What kind of team are we talking about? 6 operators from the Special Operations community, plus you as the intelligence specialist. All volunteers with extensive combat experience in this theater. The team leader would be Master Sergeant David Reaper Thompson. I think you know him by reputation. Sarah did indeed know Thompson by reputation. He was a legend in special operations circles, a sniper with over 200 confirmed kills and a reputation for bringing his people home alive. If Martinez was assigning Thompson to lead the mission, it meant they were taking the threat very seriously indeed. When would this mission take place? Insertion would be in 72 hours, Martinez replied. Based on the intelligence indicators we're seeing, the enemy attack is scheduled for some time in the next week. We need to get ahead of their timeline if we're going to have any chance of stopping it. Sarah felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. 3 weeks ago, she had been a desk officer, whose biggest concern was meeting analysis deadlines. Now she was being asked to volunteer for what amounted to a suicide mission, deep in enemy territory. The rational part of her mind was screaming that this was insane, that she should request a transfer to a safer assignment. But she also thought about Tank, who was still recovering from his wounds but would be back in the field within a month. She thought about the wounded soldiers she had seen during the ambush and the medical facility that was one of the planned targets. Most of all, she thought about Hassan's final words and his warning that many more would come. Sir, I need to ask, why me? You could assign any number of qualified intelligence officers to this mission. Martinez smiled grimly. Because you've already proven you can operate effectively behind enemy lines under the worst possible circumstances. Because you know these particular enemies and their tactics better than anyone else in theater. And because you've demonstrated that you can make the hard decisions when lives are at stake. He paused, letting his words sink in. But mostly because you're the only intelligence officer who has looked the enemy in the eye and lived to tell about it. That kind of experience can't be taught in a classroom or gained from analyzing reports. It comes from being tested in combat and proving you have what it takes. Sarah realized that Martinez was right. The ambush had changed her in fundamental ways, given her insights and capabilities that couldn't be duplicated through training or study. She had crossed a line that day, from observer to participant, and there was no going back. What about the bounty on my head? She asked. Won't that complicate the mission? It might, Martinez admitted. But it also gives us an opportunity. The enemy is looking for you, expecting you to be hiding somewhere safe. They won't be expecting you to come looking for them. Sarah walked back to the map and studied the target locations again. 5 simultaneous attacks that could cripple coalition operations in the region and cost hundreds of lives. The intelligence she could gather might be the only way to prevent that outcome. She thought about the young soldiers she had seen during her deployment, many of them barely out of high school, thrust into a complex war in a foreign land. She thought about the local civilians who would be caught in the crossfire if the attack succeeded. She thought about the promise she had made to herself in Hassan's cave, that she would do whatever was necessary to protect the people under her care. I'll do it, she said quietly. Martinez nodded, as if he had expected no other answer. Good. You'll spend the next 48 hours in intensive preparation with Thompson's team. Combat training, insertion techniques, communications procedures, emergency protocols. It's going to be the most concentrated crash course in special operations you've ever experienced. He handed her the classified folder. Study these materials tonight. Memorize every detail of the target area, every possible approach and escape route. Your life and the lives of your teammates will depend on how well you know that terrain. As Sarah left the briefing room with the folder under her arm, she realized that she was about to embark on the most dangerous mission of her military career. The intelligence officer who had accidentally become a combat soldier was about to deliberately become something else entirely, a hunter stalking the most dangerous prey in Afghanistan. But as she walked across the base toward her quarters, Sarah also felt a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. For the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, she wasn't just analyzing the war from a distance. She was about to become an active participant in shaping its outcome. The mountains were calling, and Sarah Chen was ready to answer. The enemy had made her a target, that they were about to discover that sometimes the target shoots back, and when it did, it shot to kill. In her quarters that night, Sarah spread the photographs and maps across her desk and began the meticulous process of memorizing every detail of the target area. She studied approach routes, defensive positions, escape corridors, and potential observation points. Each piece of information was catalogued and cross-referenced with her existing knowledge of enemy tactics and behavior patterns. As she worked, Sarah felt the familiar rhythm of intelligence analysis taking over, but with a crucial difference. This time, she wasn't preparing a briefing for someone else to act upon. She was preparing herself for direct action, for a mission that would test every skill she had developed and every lesson she had learned. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, and Sarah Chen was determined to be ready for whatever the mountains might throw at her. The enemy had called her the Ghost, and she was about to prove just how accurate that nickname really was. Tomorrow, she would begin training with some of the most dangerous men in the American military. In 72 hours, she would be inserted deep behind enemy lines, with a mission that could determine the outcome of the war in this entire region. The simple intelligence officer was about to discover just how far her transformation could go.